It was one of those mornings when everything felt heavier than usual. The airport was buzzing with noise, people dragging suitcases, children crying, announcements echoing through the speakers. A tall black woman in her late 30s walked quietly through the crowd, holding her passport in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. Her name was Maya. She looked tired but calm, dressed simply in jeans, a blazer, and a small crossbody bag. She wasn't someone who liked to draw attention. Her work required her to travel often, and after 3 sleepless nights of meetings and delays, all she wanted was to get home. At the security checkpoint, she stood patiently in line. The man ahead of her grumbled about missing his flight, while 2 young girls behind her giggled over their phones. Maya smiled faintly, waiting for her turn. When her turn came, she placed her laptop and phone in the tray and stepped through the metal detector. It beeped faintly. She stopped, surprised. "Ma'am, step back," said a tall white officer with a hard expression. His name tag read Officer Dan. His voice carried authority, but also something else, a tone that made people nervous without knowing why. Maya stepped back and asked softly, "Is something wrong?" He looked her up and down, not answering right away. Then he said, "You got something on you we should know about?" She frowned, confused. "No, I don't think so." "Empty your pockets," he said sharply. Maya did as told, placing her car keys and a small hand cream on the tray. The machine beeped again when she walked through. The officer crossed his arms. "Ma'am, we're going to need to do an additional search." "That's fine," Maya said, trying to stay polite. She'd been through random checks before. She knew it could happen to anyone, but this time something felt different. The officer motioned to another guard. "Take her to the side." The young female guard looked uneasy but nodded. They led Maya to a small area beside the scanner. Officer Dan followed. "What's the purpose of your trip?" he asked without looking at her passport. "I was at a conference," she replied. "In Chicago. I'm flying home today." "Conference, huh?" he said with a smirk. "What kind of conference?" "Law and community relations." He raised an eyebrow. "Law? You a lawyer or something?" "Yes," she said calmly. He chuckled. "You don't look like one." Maya blinked, unsure if she'd heard that right. "I'm sorry." He shrugged, pretending it was a harmless comment. "Nothing. Just saying you look more like a performer than a lawyer." The young guard glanced at Maya with an apologetic expression, clearly uncomfortable. Maya took a slow breath and forced herself to stay calm. "I assure you, I'm exactly what I said I am," Maya said quietly. But Officer Dan wasn't done. He took her bag and began going through it with exaggerated movements, pulling out her wallet, her makeup bag, her documents. "Everything. Traveling alone?" he asked. "Yes." "No family waiting for you?" "I have family, but that's not relevant," she replied, her tone still controlled. He smirked again. "Just asking. People like you usually got interesting stories." Maya's stomach tightened. She could feel the eyes of others on her now. Some people had stopped walking, pretending to check their phones, but clearly watching what was happening. She tried to stay composed. "Officer, is there a reason for this search?" "I've followed all the instructions." He dropped her passport on the table with a thud. "You're acting nervous." "I'm tired," she said, trying to smile. "That's all." He leaned closer. "Tired people don't usually talk this much." Her hands trembled slightly, not out of fear, but frustration. She'd faced subtle disrespect before, but this was different. Public, deliberate, unnecessary. After several minutes of rummaging, he found nothing suspicious. Still, he didn't stop. He looked at her again. "I think I'm going to have to run a check." "You could be using someone else's ID." Maya frowned. "That's my ID. You can call my office if you want." "Oh, I'll call someone," he said with a smirk. "But not your office." He took out his radio and called for assistance with a suspicious female traveler. The words made Maya's heart sink. Suspicious for what? A few travelers nearby began recording on their phones. One older woman whispered, "She didn't do anything." Another muttered, "This is ridiculous." Maya tried to explain again. "Officer, please. I'm a lawyer. I have my business card in my wallet. I just want to make my flight." "Sure," he said mockingly. "Everyone says that." He gestured toward her arms. "Turn around, please." "What for?" she asked, startled. "For safety reasons." Before she could say more, he grabbed her wrists roughly and pulled them behind her back. The cold click of the handcuffs echoed in the air. Gasps filled the area. Someone shouted, "Why are you arresting her?" "Step back, sir," the officer barked. "She's resisting." "I'm not resisting," Maya said, her voice breaking. "You're hurting me." But he didn't listen. He pulled her forward, his hand gripping her arm tightly. "Let's go," he said. The young female guard looked horrified. "Sir, maybe we should—" "Stay out of it," he snapped. They walked past the crowd. Maya's head was held high, but tears burned her eyes. Cameras followed her as she was led through the terminal like a criminal. The humiliation was unbearable. A man nearby shouted, "That's not right." Another woman yelled, "We got this on video!" But Officer Dan kept walking, pretending not to hear. When they reached a small security room, he pushed the door open and told her to sit down. Maya sat quietly, trying to steady her breathing. Her wrists hurt from the cuffs. He stood across from her, arms crossed. "You think you can talk your way out of this?" "I don't need to talk my way out of anything," she said softly. "You made a mistake," he laughed. "A mistake?" "Lady, you walked through security looking guilty as sin. You kept talking back. You people never learn." Those words stung. Maya closed her eyes, silently counting to 10. She didn't want to cry, not here. Not in front of him. Minutes passed. The officer typed something on his computer, pretending to be busy. Then his radio crackled with another voice asking for a status update. "Got her detained," he said. "Probably nothing serious, but she's being uncooperative." Maya looked up. "Uncooperative? I did everything you asked." He ignored her. Her phone began to buzz in her bag, probably her assistant checking in about the flight. He didn't let her answer. She sat there, staring at the wall, thinking about her job, her clients, and the irony of it all. She spent her life fighting for justice, yet here she was, powerless against the very system she tried to improve. After what felt like forever, another officer entered. An older man with kind eyes. He looked at Maya, then at Dan. "What's going on here?" "Suspicious passenger," Dan said, acting nervous. "Might be using fake ID." The older officer took Maya's passport, studied it carefully, then looked at her face. "This ID is legitimate," he said firmly. "And she's listed as a licensed attorney. What exactly made you think she was suspicious?" Dan hesitated. "Just her behavior." "Her behavior," the older man repeated slowly. "Or her color?" Dan's face stiffened. "Excuse me?" "I said," the senior officer continued calmly. "Is there any reason you targeted her other than how she looks?" The room fell silent. Maya didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The older officer sighed, then turned to her. "Ma'am, I'm very sorry for this. You can remove those cuffs." He took the keys from Dan's belt and unlocked them himself. Maya rubbed her wrists, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you." Dan opened his mouth to protest, but the older man cut him off. "That'll be all, officer. Step outside." When Dan left, Maya sat quietly, her eyes still wet. The older officer handed back her passport. "You don't deserve this. Some people let power go to their heads. I'll make sure this is reported," she nodded slowly. "I appreciate that." Outside, the crowd that had recorded the scene was still there. A few people approached her gently, asking if she was okay. Someone said, "We got the whole thing on video. Don't worry, we'll make sure people see it." Maya thanked them softly and walked toward her gate, her hands still shaking. She didn't know that within hours, that same video would explode online. Millions would see what happened. And the officer who humiliated her, the man who thought his badge made him untouchable, had just started digging his own grave. The news of what happened at the airport spread faster than anyone expected. Within an hour, people across the terminal were talking about the woman who got handcuffed for nothing. A few travelers had posted the videos on social media. The clips showed Maya being calm, polite, and cooperative, and the officer being rude and rough for no reason. But Maya didn't know any of that yet. She was still sitting in a small holding room at the airport security office, waiting for someone to explain what would happen next. Her wrists were red from the cuffs. The older officer who had released her earlier had promised to report the incident, but he'd been called away to another part of the terminal. The room was quiet except for the humming of the air conditioner. Maya stared at the table, her heart still beating fast. The humiliation still burned inside her chest. She had been embarrassed in front of strangers, treated like a criminal, and spoken to like she was nothing. She kept replaying the officer's words in her head. His tone, his smirk, his disbelief that someone like her could be a lawyer. After a while, the door opened again. It was Officer Dan. He walked in as if nothing had happened, holding a few papers in his hand. "Well," he said coldly, "looks like we're done here. You're free to go." Maya looked up slowly. "Free to go?" "Yeah," he said. "We didn't find anything. Guess you checked out after all." Her voice was calm but firm. "You handcuffed me in front of everyone. You went through my things. You called me a liar. And now you just say I can leave?" He shrugged. "That's how it goes sometimes. You fit a profile, I did my job." She blinked, shocked. "A profile? What profile is that exactly?" He didn't answer. He just looked down at his papers, pretending to write something. "I'd like your badge number," she said quietly. He looked up slowly, annoyed. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. I want your badge number," he smirked again. "You planning to file a complaint?" "I am," she said, meeting his eyes. He leaned back in his chair. "You go ahead, ma'am. You think anyone's going to take your word over mine? Good luck with that." There it was again. That arrogance, that invisible wall of authority he thought made him untouchable. Maya didn't argue. She simply stood, adjusted her blazer, and picked up her bag. "I'll see myself out." He watched her go, still smirking. When she stepped outside the room, she noticed several passengers looking her way. A few nodded quietly. Some smiled gently, as if to say they were sorry for what happened. One woman walked up and whispered, "We saw everything. I have the video on my phone. Don't let him get away with it." Maya's eyes softened. "Thank you," she said. The woman nodded and handed her a business card. "Call me if you need a witness." Maya tucked it into her bag and headed toward her gate. Her flight was delayed by an hour, giving her time to breathe. She sat by the window, staring out at the runway. The sound of engines roaring outside reminded her of how small one person could feel in a big, unfair world. She could have cried, but she didn't. Instead, she took out her notebook and began writing everything that had happened. Every word, every action, every witness she could remember. She knew details mattered. As she wrote, her phone buzzed again. This time, she saw dozens of notifications from her colleagues. Messages like, "Is this you?" and "We saw the video online." Her heart skipped. She opened her social media feed. There it was, a short video clip showing her standing calmly while the officer mocked her and then handcuffed her. The caption read, "Black woman detained for no reason at airport. Watch how she handles it." The clip had already been viewed thousands of times. People were furious in the comments, calling it a clear act of discrimination. Maya closed her phone, unsure how to feel. She didn't want fame or pity. She just wanted respect. As she sat there thinking, a soft voice spoke beside her. "Excuse me, miss?" She turned to see the same older officer from earlier. He held his cap in his hands, looking a bit uneasy. "I just wanted to say again how sorry I am," he said quietly. "I saw what happened on video. It's not who we should be as officers." Maya nodded. "Thank you. You were kind. I appreciate that." He hesitated, then said, "That man's been warned before. Complaints, mostly small ones, but still complaints. I'll make sure this one reaches the right people." She looked at him. "Do you think it will matter?" He sighed. "I hope so. Things don't change overnight, but truth has a way of surfacing." Maya smiled faintly. "That's what I believe too." He nodded, then left quietly. When it was finally time to board, Maya stood up, still holding her bag close. She walked down the jet bridge, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched, of being judged. She found her seat near the window and sat down. The plane filled slowly with passengers, and soon the hum of engines drowned out her thoughts. As the plane took off, she closed her eyes. She remembered her father's words from years ago. "You don't fight every battle with anger, Maya. Sometimes you let the truth do the work for you." At that moment, she decided she would file a complaint, not just for herself, but for every person who had been treated unfairly and stayed silent. When the plane landed hours later, Maya switched on her phone again. The number of notifications had doubled. Her assistant had sent a message. "You're trending. Call me ACP," she sighed, leaning back in her seat. She didn't want attention, but maybe this was how change began, when the right story reached the right people. At the arrivals gate, a group of journalists waited. Someone must have leaked her name. Microphones and cameras flashed as she walked through the crowd, trying to stay calm. "Ma'am, do you plan to take legal action? Can you tell us what happened with the officer?" "Do you think this was racial profiling?" She didn't answer any questions. Instead, she said softly, "I'll speak when the time is right." When she finally reached home, she sank into her couch and took a deep breath. The silence of her living room felt strange after the chaos of the day. She opened her laptop and started writing again, this time a formal report for the airport's internal affairs department. Every sentence was clear, factual, and calm. She didn't exaggerate anything. She didn't add emotion where it wasn't needed. The truth was enough. After finishing, she sent it to her firm's senior partner, who replied within minutes, "We stand with you. We'll take it from here." She closed her laptop, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to cry, not out of weakness, but out of release. The next morning, she woke up to find her face on the news. The video had gone viral overnight. Reporters were calling it a clear case of discrimination caught on camera. Civil rights groups were demanding an investigation. Meanwhile, inside the airport, things were heating up. Officer Dan had been called into his supervisor's office. He walked in, still acting confident, but the room felt different this time. His supervisor was holding a printed report and a phone showing the viral video. "Dan," the supervisor said slowly, "care to explain this?" Dan frowned. "What's there to explain?" She was acting suspicious. The supervisor turned the screen toward him. "Suspicious?" She was calm the entire time. "You mocked her? You handcuffed her without cause, and now the whole country's watching this." For the first time, Dan didn't have a comeback. He shifted uncomfortably. "People always twist things online." "Not this time," the supervisor said. "You crossed a line." Dan tried to speak again, but the supervisor raised a hand. "You're suspended pending investigation. Turn in your badge." The color drained from his face. "Suspended? For doing my job?" The supervisor shook his head. "You weren't doing your job. You were feeding your ego, and now you've embarrassed this entire department." That night, as Maya scrolled through the endless flood of supportive messages, she didn't smile or celebrate. She only whispered to herself, "Truth always finds a way." She didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning. The humiliation she faced would soon turn into something far greater, a fight that would expose the system for what it really was, and the officer who thought he could get away with mocking and handcuffing her. He had no idea that he'd already set his own downfall in motion. The following morning began like any other, except the world suddenly knew Maya's name. Her phone kept ringing nonstop. Reporters, lawyers, activists, everyone wanted to talk to the woman who had been handcuffed at the airport for no reason. Her assistant called first thing in the morning. "You're everywhere," she said breathlessly. "The video's on every major news channel. Even international media picked it up overnight." Maya sat on her couch holding her coffee but not drinking it. Her hands trembled slightly. "That fast?" "Yes," her assistant said. "People are furious. They're tagging the airport police department, demanding an apology." Maya rubbed her forehead. "I didn't want this kind of attention." "I know," her assistant replied softly, "but maybe it's for a reason." When Maya checked her email, there were hundreds of messages. From strangers, from old classmates, even from people she didn't know. Some wrote to thank her for staying calm. Others shared their own painful stories about discrimination in public places. It was overwhelming, but somewhere deep inside, Maya knew this could be something bigger than her. She had spent years fighting for justice in quiet courtrooms and conference halls. But now life had thrown her case straight into the spotlight. Meanwhile, back at the airport, Officer Dan's world had started to fall apart. The moment he handed in his badge the day before, he'd convinced himself it was temporary. He believed he'd go back to work after things cooled down. But that morning, when he logged onto his social media, he saw his own face all over the internet, and not in a good way. Clips of him mocking Maya were being replayed on the news. People were calling him a disgrace. His inbox was flooded with angry messages. Even his neighbors had started avoiding him. He slammed his laptop shut and muttered, "This is ridiculous. I didn't do anything wrong." His phone rang. It was his supervisor. "You might want to stay off the internet for a while," the man said. Dan frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means the department's opening a full internal investigation," his boss replied. "You're on official suspension with pay until further notice. You're not to speak to the press. Dan's voice rose. Suspension? Over some viral nonsense? Not nonsense, the supervisor said firmly. You humiliated someone who turned out to be a well-known lawyer working on federal civil rights cases. The city council is demanding answers, so for your own good, stay quiet. The call ended before Dan could respond. He sat back on his couch staring at the wall. For the first time, the reality of what he'd done started to sink in. Across town, Maya was preparing to go to her office. She didn't want to hide. Her colleagues had already seen the video and were waiting to support her. When she arrived, everyone in the office stood up. Some clapped quietly, others came forward to hug her. You handled it with so much grace, one coworker said. Anyone else would have shouted or fought back, but you stayed calm. Maya smiled faintly. If I had shouted, it would have been worse. They'd say I was angry, that I was dangerous. Sometimes silence is stronger than noise. Her senior partner, a calm older man with years of courtroom experience, walked over. I saw the footage, Maya. You were incredible. You have every right to take this to court, and this firm will back you completely. She nodded, grateful. Thank you, but I don't want revenge. I just want accountability. That's exactly what makes you powerful, he said gently. You're not after destruction, you're after change. That evening, the law firm released a short statement to the press confirming who Maya was, a respected civil rights lawyer returning from a conference on police bias training. The irony of that detail caught everyone's attention. The same system she was helping improve had turned on her. Within hours, the story took a new direction. News anchors debated the deeper issue of prejudice in law enforcement. Community leaders called for reform. Even a few police officers from other cities publicly spoke out, saying, "We can do better than this." Maya watched some of the coverage from her living room. Her face was calm, but her heart was heavy. She wasn't looking for fame. She wanted to make sure no one else had to live through that kind of humiliation again. Later that night, she received a call from a woman she didn't know. The voice on the other end was gentle but firm. Ms. Maya, my name's Angela. I work in the city's Department of Justice. I saw the video. If you're willing, I'd like to help file a formal civil complaint. What happened to you isn't just wrong, it's illegal. Maya hesitated for a second. Do you really think it will make a difference? Angela's voice softened. It already has. People are listening now. Let's make sure they don't forget. Maya agreed to meet her the next morning. The next day, when Maya walked into the Department of Justice building, several people recognized her and nodded in respect. Angela, a kind middle-aged woman with bright eyes, led her to a conference room. We're starting a public inquiry, she explained. It's not just about one officer anymore. It's about a pattern of behavior. Your case can lead the way. Maya spent the next few hours giving her statement in detail. The words, the tone, the crowd's reaction, everything. The investigators listened carefully, taking notes. At one point, one of them said quietly, "You kept your composure the whole time. That video alone will speak volumes." When the meeting ended, Angela shook her hand warmly. You've done something brave, Maya. I know it wasn't your choice to be in this position, but sometimes life picks us to stand for something bigger. Maya smiled slightly. I just hope it helps someone. That afternoon, she walked out of the building and took a deep breath. The air felt a little lighter, even though she knew the road ahead would be long. Meanwhile, Officer Dan sat in his small apartment, watching the evening news. Every channel seemed to show Maya's calm face beside his own red, angry one. The contrast was striking. Reporters were saying things like, "The officer who mocked her is now under investigation." His phone rang again. This time it was a friend from the force. Man, what did you do? The friend asked in disbelief. They're saying you might lose your badge for good. Dan's voice cracked. It's just one mistake. Everyone's acting like I committed a crime. Maybe it's not about one mistake, his friend replied carefully. Maybe it's about what it represents. Dan hung up angry. But that night, as he lay awake staring at the ceiling, the noise of the world around him started to fade. For the first time, he felt a quiet guilt creeping in. The image of Maya's calm face as he handcuffed her wouldn't leave his mind. The next morning, the police department announced that Officer Dan was being placed on unpaid leave, pending full investigation. The statement included a public apology to Maya and a promise to review internal procedures. The announcement went viral, just like the original video had. News headlines read, "Justice begins for Maya. And city promises change after airport incident. When Maya saw the news, she didn't smile. She just exhaled slowly. She wasn't celebrating. She was relieved that truth had started moving in the right direction. Her phone buzzed again. It was her mother calling from out of state. "I saw you on TV," her mother said softly. "You look so strong." Maya's eyes welled up. "I was terrified, Mom. I didn't feel strong." "But you were," her mother said gently. "Strength isn't about fighting. It's about standing tall when they try to push you down." That night, Maya sat by her window looking out at the city lights. She thought about all the people who had sent her messages, the strangers who supported her, and even the officer who had tried to humiliate her. Maybe, she thought, this wasn't just about her anymore. Maybe this was about everyone who had ever been silenced. In the quiet of her apartment, she whispered to herself, "This isn't over, not until something changes." Outside, the world continued to watch. And though Maya didn't yet know how big the storm would become, one thing was certain. The woman who had been mocked and handcuffed at the airport had now become the face of truth, and the man who thought he'd buried her dignity had unknowingly buried his own career instead. Days turned into weeks, but the story refused to fade. Each day, new details came out. Journalists dug deeper, discovering that the airport police department had received several prior complaints about the same officer. Most of them were dismissed or quietly ignored. But now, with a viral video and a public outcry, they couldn't hide behind silence anymore. Maya had returned to her normal work routine, or at least she tried to. Her desk was covered in case files, but her mind kept drifting back to that morning at the airport. Sometimes she'd look at her wrist and remember the cold metal of the handcuffs, the shame of being stared at like a criminal. But more than pain, she now felt purpose. Every time she opened her email, she found messages from strangers thanking her. People shared stories of being mistreated in public spaces, travelers who were searched unfairly, employees who were judged for how they looked, students who faced discrimination. One message stood out. It was from a young man who wrote, "I used to think staying quiet was safer. But after seeing you, I realized silence doesn't protect us. Thank you for showing dignity when they tried to take it from you." Maya read that message twice and saved it. Her senior partner entered her office that afternoon, holding a folder. "The city is launching an independent inquiry," he said. "They're reviewing every complaint in the last 3 years. Your case started this." Maya leaned back in her chair, surprised. "I didn't think it would go this far." "That's what truth does," he said gently. "It travels farther than you expect." That evening, Maya was invited to a community town hall meeting. The room was full of people, students, activists, police representatives, and journalists. When she walked in, the room went quiet. She wasn't used to that kind of attention, but she took a deep breath and stood at the podium. "I didn't come here as a lawyer tonight," she began. "I came as a woman who knows what it feels like to be judged before you even speak." The room was silent. "I wasn't arrested because I broke a rule. I was arrested because someone decided I looked like trouble. And that's the part that hurts. Not the cuffs, not the humiliation, but the belief that I didn't belong." People nodded, some with tears in their eyes. She continued, "But I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for change. Because real justice isn't about one person winning. It's about making sure no one else loses their dignity again." When she finished speaking, the entire room stood up and applauded. Reporters recorded every word. That clip too spread across social media. People called her the voice of calm courage. Meanwhile, inside the police department, things were no longer quiet. The chief had called an emergency meeting. A long table filled with senior officers and investigators sat in a tense silence. A large screen played the original airport footage again, frame by frame. Each word, each gesture was examined. The chief pointed to the screen. "This is what the world sees when they look at us," he said sternly. "Tell me, is this who we are?" No one answered. An investigator cleared his throat. "Sir, we reviewed previous complaints against the officer in question. There's a pattern: unprofessional behavior, unnecessary searches, use of disrespectful language." The chief frowned. "And we didn't act on those reports?" "Some were dismissed," the investigator admitted quietly. "There wasn't enough proof back then." "Well," the chief said, "we've got all the proof we need now." That same afternoon, the department released a public statement. It said that the officer involved in the airport incident had been terminated pending final review, and that new training programs on bias and conduct would begin immediately. The statement was covered on every major news outlet. The headline read, "Airport officer fired after viral discrimination case. City implements new reforms." When Maya saw the news, she didn't smile or cheer. She just sat quietly, letting out a long breath she'd been holding for weeks. She wasn't happy that someone had lost his job. She was relieved that the truth had finally been acknowledged. Later that evening, her phone rang again. It was Angela, the woman from the Department of Justice. "They've made it official," she said. "The officer's been dismissed. But the city wants to do more. They're starting a new community program, and they want you to help lead it." Maya was taken aback. "Me?" "Yes," Angela said. "You've become a symbol of grace under pressure. People trust your voice. They want you to speak at the first training session for law enforcement. The goal is to rebuild trust between officers and the community." Maya hesitated. The thought of walking into a room full of officers, people wearing the same uniform as the man who humiliated her, felt heavy. But after a moment, she nodded to herself. "I'll do it," she said quietly. A week later, she arrived at the police training center. The air was thick with tension. Dozens of officers sat in the audience, their faces a mix of curiosity, discomfort, and quiet respect. The facilitator introduced her simply. "This is Maya. You've all seen the video. Now you'll hear the story from the person in it." Maya stood at the front of the room holding a small note card. She didn't read from it. She just looked around the room and spoke from her heart. "I want to start by saying that I don't hate the police," she began softly. "In fact, my uncle served for 20 years. I know what it means to wear that uniform with pride. But pride should never turn into prejudice." The room was silent. "I know what it feels like to be powerless in front of someone who has authority. I also know that not all of you are like the man who hurt me. But when one of you abuses that power, it affects all of you." She paused and looked at their faces. Some looked ashamed, some thoughtful, some even emotional. "I didn't come here to make anyone feel guilty," she said. "I came to remind you that the badge you wear isn't just metal. It's trust. Every person you meet is someone's family, someone's friend. You might forget that for a moment, but they don't." For a long moment after she finished, no one spoke. Then a young officer in the back stood up. His voice shook slightly. "I'm sorry for what you went through. You're right. We forget sometimes that we hold power over people's lives. Thank you for reminding us." Maya nodded, her eyes glistening. "Thank you for listening." The room broke into quiet applause. For the first time since the airport incident, she felt peace. Not because she'd won, but because something inside her had healed. After the session ended, the police chief approached her. "You changed something today," he said sincerely. "I can't undo what happened, but I can promise this department will do better." She smiled faintly. "That's all I ever wanted." That night, when she returned home, she sat by her window again, watching the city lights flicker. Her phone buzzed with more messages, this time from people who had attended the training. Officers wrote things like, "You made me rethink how I treat people," and "Your story changed the way I see my job." She read them all quietly, her eyes soft with gratitude. Meanwhile, across town, Officer Dan was packing his things into a cardboard box. His apartment was silent except for the sound of a television playing the evening news. When the reporter mentioned his dismissal, he turned the volume down and sat on the edge of his bed. For the first time, he saw the full clip of the incident. Not just the parts that had gone viral, but the raw footage with sound. Hearing his own tone, his own words, made him feel a weight in his chest he couldn't ignore. He realized how cruel he had sounded, how blind he had been to the pain he caused. He turned off the TV and sat in silence. The arrogance that once filled him was gone, replaced by something he hadn't felt in years. Shame. Days later, he wrote a letter. It wasn't for the media or the public. It was addressed to Maya. In it, he wrote, "I can't change what I did, but I've seen what it cost you, and I'm sorry. I hope one day I can make things right by becoming a better man." He didn't send it, but writing it was enough to start something inside him, a small step toward understanding. As weeks passed, the city slowly began to heal. The airport installed new systems to monitor officer behavior. The police department added empathy and communication training to its programs. And Maya's quiet strength continued to inspire people across the country. When she looked back on that terrible day at the airport, she realized something powerful. Sometimes, The worst moments of your life can open doors to the greatest change. And as she closed her eyes that night, she whispered softly to herself, "Maybe this is how justice truly begins, not with anger, but with truth." The following weeks brought a wave of attention that no one expected. Maya's name appeared in newspapers, online blogs, and television interviews. But she didn't chase the spotlight. In every interview, she spoke calmly and respectfully, never raising her voice, never turning the story into a personal attack. Her message remained the same. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability, about restoring dignity where it had been lost. Every time she spoke, people listened. Even those who had once dismissed discrimination as an exaggeration began to see it differently. She wasn't angry or bitter. She was composed, honest, and deeply human. That's what made her voice powerful. Her law firm soon received hundreds of requests from other victims of unfair treatment. Many wanted her to represent them. But Maya didn't take all the cases. She carefully chose the ones that could bring meaningful change. "It's not about numbers," she told her partner. "It's about showing people that silence doesn't have to be the answer." One morning, she received a call from the city's ethics board. They informed her that the official hearing for the airport incident would take place in 2 weeks. It would be public, and both she and the officer would have to appear. When the day came, the courthouse was filled to capacity. Cameras lined the hallway, and reporters whispered to one another as Maya walked in wearing a simple navy blue suit. Her calmness stood out among the noise. She didn't hide from the cameras, but she didn't play to them either. Inside the hearing room, the panel of investigators sat behind a long wooden desk. At the other end sat Maya and her attorney. A few feet away sat the officer, the man who had mocked and handcuffed her that day at the airport. He looked thinner, older, and far less confident than before. The once cocky expression was gone. He sat quietly, eyes lowered, waiting for the proceedings to begin. When it was time to speak, Maya stood. The room fell silent. She didn't bring notes or a script. She just spoke from her heart. "I came here today because I believe in accountability," she began softly. "What happened to me at the airport was not an isolated event. It was part of a bigger problem, a problem that affects many people who don't have the voice or resources to fight back." She took a slow breath before continuing. "That day I was treated like a suspect, not a citizen. I was handcuffed without reason. I was humiliated in public, and I was mocked for the color of my skin. But I'm not here to seek punishment. I'm here because I want to make sure no one else experiences what I did." The panel members listened attentively. Some of them looked visibly moved. The lead investigator nodded slowly, taking notes as she spoke. When she finished, her lawyer presented the evidence: the video recordings from travelers, the timeline of events, and the records of past complaints against the officer. Each detail painted a clear picture of misconduct. The panel studied everything carefully. Then it was the officer's turn to speak. He stood nervously, clearing his throat. His hands trembled slightly. For a long moment, he didn't know where to begin. "I was wrong," he said finally, his voice low but steady. "There's no excuse for how I acted that day. I let my ego get in the way of my duty. I disrespected someone who didn't deserve it. And I've had to live with that ever since." He paused, his eyes glancing briefly toward Maya. "When I first saw the video online, I felt angry. Not at myself, but at the people who exposed me. I told myself they exaggerated what happened. But when I watched it again, really watched it, I saw what everyone else saw, and I was ashamed." The room was quiet. No one expected him to admit that much. He went on. "I grew up thinking that authority meant being in control. I never realized that real authority means responsibility, not power. What I did that day was a betrayal of everything this uniform stands for." He took a deep breath and his voice cracked slightly. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I do want to say I'm sorry. Not just to Ms. Maya, but to everyone I let down. I know sorry can't erase what I did, but it's the only truth I have left." The room stayed silent for several seconds after he sat down. Maya didn't say anything, but her expression softened slightly. After hours of discussion and review, the panel announced its decision. The officer was found guilty of misconduct and falsifying arrest records. His employment was officially terminated, and he was banned from working in law enforcement again. But the board didn't stop there. They also announced a new initiative, a community-led reform program to retrain officers on bias awareness and respectful engagement. They named Maya as one of the advisors for the program. The announcement received loud applause from the audience. Reporters outside rushed to cover the story. "Justice served in viral airport case," the headlines read. But Maya didn't see it that way. When she stepped out of the courthouse, she told the waiting cameras, "This isn't about winning or losing. It's about learning. Change starts when we face what's wrong instead of hiding it." Her calm, mature words spread everywhere that evening. News channels replayed her statement over and over again, calling it a moment of grace. People online praised her for her dignity, saying she represented what true strength looked like. Later that week, the mayor's office contacted her to thank her personally for inspiring citywide reform. "You've helped us start an important conversation," the mayor said. "We want to build a better system and we'd like your help." Maya accepted the offer. She didn't see it as a reward. She saw it as a responsibility. For months, she worked closely with officials, community leaders, and police trainers to design sessions that taught empathy, patience, and communication. She met officers from different backgrounds, many of whom admitted that her story changed how they viewed their jobs. One day, after finishing a long training session, she sat alone in the empty hall. Sunlight streamed through the windows, reflecting off the polished floors. For the first time in months, she felt peace. Her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. When she answered, she heard a familiar voice. It was the officer. "I didn't think you'd pick up," he said quietly. Maya paused. "What do you need?" she asked calmly. "I just wanted to thank you," he said, "for what you said in court about accountability, not revenge. You could have destroyed me publicly, but you didn't. I know you don't owe me anything, but I wanted you to know I'm trying to be a better person. I've started volunteering at a youth center. Maybe it's small, but it's something." Maya didn't speak right away. After a moment, she said, "Change doesn't happen overnight." "But trying is a start," he seemed relieved. "I'll keep trying," he said, then hung up. She sat quietly after the call, staring at the sunset outside the window. She didn't feel anger toward him anymore. The bitterness had faded, replaced by something gentler, understanding. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close. A few months later, she was invited to speak at a national conference about equality and justice. As she stood before a crowd of students, officers, and officials, she shared her story not as a victim, but as a survivor. "I learned that standing up for yourself doesn't always mean fighting loudly," she said. "Sometimes it means standing still while the truth speaks for you." Her words were met with thunderous applause. As the event ended, a young woman approached her with tears in her eyes. "Because of you, I decided to become a lawyer," she said. "I want to help people the way you did." Maya smiled warmly. That's how real change begins, when one voice inspires another. That night she returned home exhausted but fulfilled. She sat by her window again, watching the quiet city lights shimmer. The same city that once humiliated her was now listening, learning, and slowly becoming better. She realized she didn't just win a case, she started a movement. And that was far more powerful than any courtroom victory. As the clock struck midnight, she whispered softly to herself, "Sometimes life hands you pain not to break you, but to teach you how strong you really are."